Welcome to the Great Loop Radio Podcast, brought to you by America's Great Loop Cruisers Association. We're dedicated to sharing Great Loop information and inspiration with those actively cruising, planning for, or dreaming about a Great Loop adventure. I'm Kim Russo. I'm the director of AGLCA. Today, we're going to update you on our 2025 advocacy efforts. We did a podcast on this earlier in the legislative season, and we've got some additional information to share and some more details. So Karen Nettles from the Home Port crew will join me to do that. Before we jump in, as always, I want to take a moment to recognize and thank our Admiral sponsors who support AGLCA at the highest level. And we have a new one to announce. So we'll start with Kathy All from Edward Jones. She is our new Admiral sponsor. So Kathy, thank you for that. And of course, our stalwart Admiral sponsors, Great Loop Yacht Sales, Passage Maker Trawler Fest, Skipper Bob Publications, and Waterway Guide Media. As always, we encourage our listeners and viewers to support these businesses that support the Great Loop. And with the recognition finished, Karen Nettles, thanks for joining me. Welcome back.
Oh, you're quite welcome. Always glad to be here.
Yeah, so where should we jump into our advocacy efforts?
Well, like you said, we gave them an update of a few weeks ago, I guess it was, and there's been a busy session going on in Tallahassee. So why don't you start with an overview?
Yeah, Florida is always the hotbed of boating legislation, and that makes sense. There's more boats in Florida than any other state. Loopers spend a lot of time in Florida. There's a lot of waterways in Florida. So it's been a very busy season. There have been probably 6 or 7 separate boating related bills filed. We have actively engaged mostly on 2 that we pretty strongly oppose. The ones that we are in favor of seem to be sailing through, so there's not a whole lot of action needed there. But just on the 2 that we have been really engaged in trying to prevent from happening, there's one bill for both bills or both issues have a bill in the House and a bill in the Senate. And for each of those houses, the House and the Senate, each one goes through 2 or 3 committees. So it's been a lot. We've traveled to Tallahassee a lot, but we are making progress in making these bills more fair for all boaters, but especially for the long distance cruising style boaters that loopers tend to be. So it's been a bit busy session for sure.
And I know there's one bill that we oppose about eliminating anchoring and mooring near Florida's seaports. So can you tell us what that bill is about and what the status is?
Yeah, the bill was filed as a no anchoring or mooring as a security measure for Florida's seaports, which was kind of curious to us from the get-go. On both sides, both in the House and the Senate, the original bill would ban anchoring from 5,000 feet in any direction of the seaports if the seaports deemed that necessary and went to the Fish and Wildlife Commission to establish this no mooring or anchoring zone. 5,000 feet is almost a mile, and I think we kind of covered this in our last episode on this topic. But, if you look at a mile from any direction of a seaport, you're essentially potentially closing anchoring for a 2-mile stretch of the waterway, 2 miles before, 1 mile before, 1 mile after the seaport. That's, pretty extensive and seems like quite the overreach. And we looked at this. There have been some amendments that make it better, but certainly not where it should be. The current bill is on the table. The Senate version of the bill cuts that 5,000 feet to 2,500 feet. But again, if you look at 2,500 feet before and after a boat approaches a seaport, that's about a mile of the waterway that could be closed to anchoring. The House bill is more favorable, and we appreciate Representative Lamarca, who's the sponsor of the House bill, for working with boaters on this. It's still not to the point where we can support the bill. That current version is a 1,500-foot no anchoring or mooring zone, and it only applies to uninsured boats who are staying, I believe it's for 45 days. So certainly better. But the bottom line for us as advocates for our members and for other boaters is there doesn't seem to be a compelling reason to allow this to happen. It's being pushed as a port security measure. We can find no evidence of security issues at the ports that this would address. The Coast Guard is responsible for port security, not the state of Florida. And even for the cargo ships as they're coming into port, the security barrier around them, the no boating zone, the room you need to give them, is 300 feet. So even at 1,500 feet, it is very curious. It is one specific port. It's the Port of Palm Beach that is really pushing this measure. And we have talked with officials from the Port of Palm Beach who kind of explained what they were needing. And it has to do with an anchorage near the port. The depth makes it a suitable anchorage where not all ports have that issue. And there has been a situation in the past during a storm where a boat at that anchorage broke free, sunk in the channel for the port. So not only is it expensive to remove the boat, but the biggest cost of that to the port is actually the downtime. While that boat was being removed from the channel, ships could not access the port, and time is money in shipping. So we do understand that issue. Um, the Port of Palm Beach is the only one that has explained there being a security issue. So it is still curious, why is this a statewide bill where all the ports would have this ability? If there's a special need in Palm Beach, we could certainly look at supporting that. Palm Beach, the port officials also told us they really only needed the security zone to the south. And that's a big difference because to the north of the Port of Palm Beach is Peanut Island, which is a very popular day anchorage with local boaters that could be affected by this if it was a zone all the way around the port. So definitely some work still needs to be done on this bill to make it palatable for boaters.
Okay, and speaking of the bill, how can listeners help with the bill?
Yeah, so right now, there are still a few committees that this bill has to go through. We are continuing to hopefully work with Representative LaMarca on the House side. On the Senate side, though, there it is still a really bad bill for boaters. It's still at 2,500 feet from all directions of all ports potentially who choose to implement this. So we are asking listeners and viewers to reach out to the members of the Senate Fiscal Affairs Committee. We will put the details of how to do that in the episode notes for the podcast and in the description if you're watching this on YouTube. We'll give you some details and some guidelines, but reaching out to the members of that committee who could be the next to hear the bill could be really helpful. So we'll again post that in the episode notes and in the YouTube description.
Okay. And another bill that we oppose would limit anchoring in the most populous counties. So can you give us a little information on that bill?
I sure can. I think we also covered this in our first episode this season for advocacy, but there's been a lot of developments in this as well. This bill is being pushed by Miami Beach in an effort to clean up Biscayne Bay, which we absolutely agree. There are a lot of derelict vessels in Biscayne Bay. There are a lot of boats that are long-term stored at anchor in Biscayne Bay. And there really needs to be a resolution for that. However, that resolution needs to not affect active cruising boaters like loopers. So the bill itself, there's a couple of components. There's actually three components, and we disagree with them. I guess I'll cover them in the level of the most objectionable to the least objectionable. The first one is that this bill would close the areas around more of the islands in Biscayne Bay to anchoring. Why is this a problem? Well, it closes it for even one night of overnight anchoring. This is where the whole anchoring battles in Florida started. And initially, 10 years or so ago, some of the areas between some of those islands were closed to anchoring. That was the first loss of anchoring rights in Florida. Year after year, that area has come back to the table wanting to close more and more. We have compromised where we've thought it reasonable to do so. Last year was supposed to be, that was supposed to be it. They were not supposed to be coming back for more of this. They did. And the anchorages that they are trying to close to overnight anchoring this year there are some areas that would be affected that are popular anchorages. There is no reason that these areas should have special treatment where other areas are looking at time limitations, where you would have 45 days. That's already an existing statute. So there's no reason that these areas should get that special treatment to completely close to overnight anchoring. So we oppose that provision of the bill. Regarding the most populous counties, the bill states that counties with over 1.5 million people can limit anchoring to 30 days in a 6-month period. In concept, that's not so bad. Loopers won't stay somewhere typically for 30 days. But the problem is they're just going about this the wrong way. The existing statute that we support and we pushed for limits anchoring to 45 days where the county has set up an anchoring limitation area. If Miami Beach, if Biscayne Bay needs that kind of a time limit, then it should fall under the existing statute rather than making new laws that are special for these areas. We've talked with Commissioner Suarez from Miami Beach, who has kind of led the charge on cleaning up those boats from the bay. We understand his problem. We asked him, why not use the existing anchoring limitation area statute? And he had a pretty good reason, frankly. He said, the maximum size of a current anchoring limitation is 100 acres. It would take so many of those in Biscayne Bay to solve the problem. And the county, he says, was not willing to go for that. It would be a county effort. Um, we would support expanding the size of an ALA to solve that problem for Miami Beach if this gets folded into the existing legislation. So that's kind of what we've been pushing for. We are not against the idea of time limits to help control these problems in anchoring. We're just the way it's happening, or the way they're attempting to make it happen in Biscayne Bay. Again, different from the rest of the state. We don't know why there should be special treatment in Biscayne Bay or the other populous counties. What that could do is really just push the long-term stored vessels south into the Keys through the Okeechobee Waterway to Lee County and the Fort Myers area. It's just not a viable solution to offer special treatment to that area. And then the third provision expands the distance from a mooring field where you cannot anchor from 100 feet to 300 feet. That is not as impactful for our members, although some in bigger boats have expressed that could be a challenge too. So we are against this bill. This bill has passed all of its committees on the House side, so it is getting ready for a floor vote in the House. On the Senate side, it still has a few committees to go. We are still assessing really kind of where our listeners and viewers and our members can have some grassroots efforts there. So we'll post that in the show notes as that starts to become available. So that's where we stand right now.
Okay, so there's no particular call of action you're wanting them to do right now. You'll just follow up later.
And not at the moment. Stay tuned on that, though.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and take a break, play a message from some of our sponsors, and we'll come back and get back into the topic. Back in a moment. The time has finally come. Make your reservations now at Navy Pier Marina. Starting summer 2025, enjoy daily and hourly transient dockage in the heart of Chicago. This marina offers flexible, short-term options, making it the perfect rendezvous spot for loopers and locals, charters, yacht and boating clubs, and more. Their 5-star accommodations include concierge services, on-site laundry, 24-hour safety surveillance, washrooms and shower facilities, and even allow pets. All boats up to 183 feet are welcome with no minimum size requirement. Visit the city for a day brimming with arts, culture, fine dining, and exclusive shopping at this legendary landmark on Lake Michigan. Picture yourself navigating through the Pacific Northwest's breathtaking waters, captain of a custom adventure with Northwest Explorations. For over 20 years, they've led boaters through the stunning Inside Passage and beyond, offering meticulously maintained yacht charters and famed Mother Goose flotillas, along with yacht sales, marine service, and quality training. Based in Bellingham, Washington, Sydney and Powell River, British Columbia, Northwest Explorations is your launch pad to explore Washington, British Columbia, or Alaska with ease. From charters to maintenance, brokerage to training, they ensure every mile is unforgettable, blending confidence and camaraderie into a journey as remarkable as the destination itself. We're back on the Great Loop Radio podcast. Today we are updating you on our advocacy efforts for 2025. Karen Nettles from the Home Port Crew is with me. Karen, thanks again for being here. Let's jump back in. Where did we leave off?
Yeah, you just gave overviews of some of the bills that we oppose in this legislative session in Florida. So can you give us some of the voting bills that we do support this session?
Yeah, there are several that have been filed that we have not paid as much attention to because we do support them and they are moving forward. Probably the one we most strongly support is the Vessel Accountability Act. This one could really go a long way towards cleaning up some of the derelict vessels that often are what leads to these anti-anchoring sentiments. The Vessel Accountability Act does several things, but one is it makes it a little bit easier, I think, for law enforcement to find the owner of a boat that perhaps is derelict or abandoned. It also requires a permit for long-term anchoring, which we think is a step in the right direction for, kind of getting a handle on this issue. Having that data can help the government figure out where mooring fields might be needed if they've issued a lot of long-term anchoring permits in different areas. The permit would be needed if you anchor in one place for more than 14 days. In theory, Could a looper end up anchored somewhere for more than 14 days? Unlikely, but possible. Certainly, if they're waiting for a weather window to jump over to the Bahamas, perhaps they planned to enjoy Biscayne Bay for a week and then started waiting for a weather window that doesn't materialize. But we think that's okay. The provisions of the bill require it to be accessible online. You don't have to travel somewhere to get this permit. They're expecting it to be very much like a fishing license. So, we are supporting this bill as long as the long-term permit is issued remotely. You can do it from your boat and instantaneously, meaning there's not a waiting period. So that if you're there on the 13th day and the weather window is still not materializing, you can go ahead and get the permit and stay in compliance. So we support that bill. Is also a boating safety bill that increases the penalties for boating under the influence, a bill that increases the penalties for leaving the scene of a boating accident. Those are the kind of things that, of course, we support because we are all about safe boating. And because there's not a whole lot of controversy in there, they tend to pass pretty easily. And we don't need to be making the trips to Tallahassee to comment on those.
Okay, so thanks for the overview on what we do support. And since you've already given us the overview of what we oppose as well, can you tell us what we can expect in the next few weeks in Tallahassee in regards to all these bills?
Yeah, so this season is both ramping up and coming to a close at the same time. We're in the last, I think, 3 weeks or so of the legislative session. It ends on May 2nd, which means time is short to get these bills through the process. It also means this is where a lot of activity is happening behind the scenes. So, there are exceptions to just about everything on the schedule in Florida, but in theory, we have about one more week to go on committees. If these bills don't pass through the committees to which they've been assigned, then they die there and don't go for a floor vote. Unless they're added to, added as an amendment to a different bill. There's always a caveat to it, but the general process is about another week for them to potentially make it through committee and then be up for a vote on the floor of the House or the Senate. Then, if the bills differ, like for example, the one we started with, the seaport security measures, the House and the Senate bill are pretty different. They, of course, have to come into alignment. And then, if all of that passes, they would go to the governor for his signature to become law. That's, of course, a final point where we can do some lobbying for the bill to be defeated before the governor signs it. So, a lot still to go, but as I said, only a few more weeks left where a lot of activity will be happening.
Of course, and like I said, there's so much activity going on. How does AGLCA manage to do so much in Florida for advocacy?
Well, it's multifaceted, I guess we should say. We are fortunate to be a recreational boating organization with a full-time professional staff. So we've got a little bit of a capacity to do this. It feels like it's my full-time job right now, and that's okay. It's
Mhm.
just a few more weeks. We've also got really dedicated volunteers, both in Tallahassee and beyond, that have traveled there. I have traveled there to testify on these bills at the committee hearings. So we do a lot of it, make our impact that way. Um, it's been an interesting process, and I really want to thank our members who have repeatedly shown up to testify on these bills. It can be a little bit disheartening because we go and we speak as eloquently as we know how about the bills, and then they tend to pass the committee anyway. And we've learned a lot this year that pretty much if a bill is scheduled for a committee, it's probably going to pass. None of the legislators want to put up a bill that is going to be defeated. So if it makes it to the agenda, it's likely to pass. That said, our time is well spent going to testify anyway, because the legislators are hearing that. And a lot of what happens in Tallahassee is happening behind the scenes. So, us showing up, us letting them know we are against these bills, causes them to go back before the next committee session and see what could be adjusted, see where they can get this so that people are in agreement that it's a good bill. But in addition to that, in addition to volunteers, in addition to our organization's staff, we do retain a lobbyist in Tallahassee. She is instrumental in making any progress on this. Unfortunately, like it or not, without representation like that, we do not have a seat at the table. She is in Tallahassee, meeting with the legislators, meeting with their legal aides, knocking on doors, making sure our voice is heard. A lot of it happens behind the scenes, and it's pretty evident when we look at some of the other boating loosely aligned boating groups that are out there, kind of on social media and things about this that are making some missteps because they don't have that professional guidance. So, do I love what that costs? I absolutely do not. But is it necessary? 100%. We could not be making the kind of progress we're making without having a lobbyist, a professional lobbyist there in Tallahassee.
Of course. And speaking of the cost, how does AGLCA cover the cost of the lobbyist?
Yeah, so the costs went up greatly this year. Costs of everything have gone up. Um, I really do think our lobbyists have earned what we pay them this year, just in getting us this far. Hopefully, they'll get us across the finish line with no additional, no anti-anchoring bills passing. Um, AGLCA has formed, along with three other recreational boating organizations, we have formed the Boaters Rights Advocacy Coalition. And that is who is essentially paying our lobbyist. We divide up the cost of that among the four organizations based on how many members they have. So AGLCA, being the largest of the four, actually puts the lion's share of that bill. So AGLCA's goal this session is to raise $37,000 to pay for our Florida lobbyist. That covers the lobbyist's costs. It really doesn't cover the cost for all this travel to Tallahassee, which AGLCA will absorb if we need to. We are getting close to that 37,000. I think as of today, we've raised a little over 30,000. So we are getting there. And as I said, that the cost has gone up. So I'm pleased with where we are on our fundraising. But of course, as always, we still need more. We're hoping that some of our listeners will help us and, kind of recognize the efforts we're doing on behalf of boaters by contributing some. You can do so by going to greatloop.com. That is kind of our shopping cart site, so to speak. And right on that main page on greatloop.com, you'll see a link to make a contribution to the advocacy fund. You can also go to our main website, greatloop.org. And if you go to greatloop.org/advocacy, you'll see more details about what we do and why we do it, and a link there as well to contribute. So, one of our members suggested in our forum that anyone who is planning to do the loop or is doing the loop, if you can contribute what one night of dockage would cost you in this area, it goes a really long way towards protecting these anchorages so that we don't have to pay for dockage every single night on the Great Loop. So we would appreciate anyone who's willing to contribute and help us get to the finish line on actually paying our lobbyist for the great work she and her team have done this session.
For sure. And speaking of, we focused a lot on Florida today, but we also monitor stuff in other states. So can you give us an update on legislation going on in other states that may impact waterways?
Yeah, we actually we have a paid service that monitors pending legislation, and we subscribe to that for all states along the Great Loop route so that we can stay on top of these things and hopefully be on the front end of bills that are of concern. South Carolina actually looks like they're getting pretty close to passing a derelict vessel bill. We are in support of that bill. We agree that derelict vessels are a problem that needs to be resolved, and it's a challenging problem. We certainly thank any state that goes about it by specifically targeting those derelict vessels instead of making, sweeping anchoring restrictions. North Carolina also has a bill on the table that we have some concern about. And we are reaching out to the sponsors for clarification and hopefully an amendment that may fix what we believe is an unintended consequence. The language of the bill limits anchoring to 30 days in the state, but it doesn't clarify whether that's 30 days in one place or 30 days statewide. 30 days in one place is probably fine for a looper. 30 days in the whole state of North Carolina is probably not enough for somebody who likes to anchor and explore and take their time and peaceful. 30 days moving through the state is probably not enough. Also, highly unenforceable, in my opinion, because I don't know how you would track how many days a boat had stayed in different places throughout the state. So we would just love to see an amendment to the bill that clarifies if the intention really is 30 days in one place is the maximum. So we're working on that in North Carolina too. And I think those are kind of the big ones. We were tracking another state or two where there were bills that seemed to have died on the vine as the session has wrapped up already. But I'm sure there's more to come. All of the states are grappling with this derelict vessel issue. We're in South Carolina right now on the boat, and as we've traveled from Fort Myers, we're now in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and you see them everywhere. It is not just a Florida problem. We see them in Georgia. We see them here in South Carolina. We're really interested in helping solve the derelict vessel problem while leaving the anchorages open to active cruisers who are responsible and doing the right thing.
Well, I think we pretty much covered what you were planning to update people on today. Future updates, how do you plan to get those out?
We'll do an updated episode of the podcast if there's enough new news. Aside from that, we'll post it to our website. We can, of course, update the episode notes and the description in the YouTube video for this episode. So we'll post some updates there. And again, we will put direct links to our fundraising campaign and how you can contribute. And we will also put direct links to right now. We're recording this on April 11th, and it's a Friday. By Monday, a lot of this will start to shake out. So if you are interested in helping with the seaports bill that I mentioned, where we're trying to get that to not move forward in its current state, please contact the senators on the Senate committee that could be the next to hear it. It's not on their agenda yet, but it definitely could be in the coming week. So please call or email as soon as you're watching this. And again, the details about who to call or who to email and how to reach them and some suggested talking points and guidelines will all be in the episode notes. So we appreciate everyone listening today. We are hopeful that you will help us both with the grassroots efforts and with the fundraising. So thank you everyone for being here. And Karen, thanks for joining me again.
Quite welcome.
Yeah. Thanks to everyone who's watched or listened today. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Great Loop Radio podcast. Until then, safe cruising.